All right, so we're picking up in Deuteronomy chapter 21. I would describe the first section here of handling a murder mystery. So if one be found slain in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee to possess, lying in the field, and it be not known who hath slain him. Obviously, we're talking about events of after you've gone into the land, right? Moses is given this law, the second telling of the law to the generation that's about to go in with Joshua. He's going to die very shortly. So this is something that when this occurs, you've found a body and you don't know who killed it. We know that if you did know who killed it and it was intentional, that person would be subject to execution. If it was an accidental death, then that slayer of man would be like manslaughter in our day and time, would be able to flee to a city of refuge. But here you've just got a body and you don't know, no facts are known. You just got a dead body. So verse 2 says, Then thy elders and thy judges shall come forth, and they shall measure unto the cities which are round about him that was slain. All right, so your first step is to bring these guys out, and they have to make a determination about which city is the closest, right? So this would not have occurred within a city, right? This only applies when it's out, in the field in the wilderness, so there's no witnesses. The idea is that when it's in a city, you should be able to investigate and come up with a whodunit. So this is truly we're out in the middle of the land, not in the city. So you got to find, well, okay, what is the closest city? So you do that measurement, and then you have to bring the elders of that city, that closest city, and they're going to have to do something. It shall be that when the city which is next unto the man slain, even the elders of that city shall take a heifer which hath not been wrought with, and which hath not drawn in the yoke. All right, so we go to that closest city. The elders come, and they have to bring an heifer, a female, or a cow, or an ox, one of these large animals that normally would be used for plowing, but it has to be a new one, right? It can't be, what's the difference between a new car and a used car, right? One's driven off the lot and drops value. Here, what they have to bring is, basically a new animal that's never been used before, and so it is requiring a greater cost. It's a higher, price that they have to pay to go through this exercise when you're dealing with this unknown murder. So, what do? The elders of the city shall bring down the heifer unto a rough valley, which hath neither been eared nor sown. Okay, so we're going to an untilled location. You're not just going to go out to somebody's farmland, but you're going to go to basically raw land that no one is currently using or growing anything in. Around cities there were some suburbs, there were the cultivated fields, and so you have to get farther out to that. And so in this rough valley, they would strike off the heifer's neck there in the valley. All right, so the cost would be the cost of this animal, its life. It would be done there, and two groups would have to come and wash their hands over this heifer. So first would be the priests, the sons of Levi. They shall come near. For them the Lord thy God hath chosen to minister unto him, and to bless in the name of the Lord, and by their word shall every controversy and every stroke be tried. This is part of the role of the priest. It's not just serving, it's not just performing the sacrifices, but in the midst of that, they would have to operate in the role of judges, saying, this is what God's law says, this is what must be applied in this situation. So controversies, those are disputes. Stroke, that's where you've got some kind of battle, conflict, even up to death between men, and so that's their role as a judge. So they have to come near, and all the elders of that city, so that closest city that had been measured, they have to come near, that was next to the slain man, and wash their hands over the heifer that was beheaded in the valleys. Not like we're washing our hands in the blood or anything, but they're literally washing their hands with water. And this is a public declaration and testimony that they're innocent and that they don't know who actually killed him. So that's what they'll have to say in verse 7. And they shall say, our hands have not shed this blood, neither have our eyes seen it. Be merciful, O Lord, unto thy people, whom thou hast redeemed, and lay not innocent blood unto thy people of Israel's charge. And the blood shall be forgiven them. So you have the priests as in their role as judges, and the elders of that city often operating as like local judges. They have to swear two things. One, we didn't do it. We didn't kill this guy. Right? Our hands have not shed this blood, and neither have our eyes seen it. We don't know who did it. Right? If the judges or the elders knew who did it, and they failed to follow through on their job of bringing that person to justice, then there would be a condemnation on the nation of Israel as a whole, because this innocent blood hadn't been paid for. God required in the nation of Israel that when a murderer sheds the blood of an innocent person, that murderer's blood must be shed. So it is a confirmation that they are not being derelict or avoiding their duty. So if they truly didn't cause the death, nor they know who caused the death, so they can't, render the judgment on their head, then they're asking for mercy unto thy people Israel. So this is a request for the whole nation, not just that city, that whole nation whom thou hast redeemed. Redeemed from what? Redeemed from Egypt, right? He brought them out of bondage and slavery into this good land, and he's given them this law that's going to govern them, and a request to lay not the innocent blood unto thy people's charge. So if they hadn't done what they were supposed to do, if they knew who the murderer was and they hadn't dealt with it, then that blood would be laid to their account, that innocent blood, and there would be consequences for that, and the Lord would bring down wrath upon them. And so they're saying this is not a scenario where we've done wrong, where we could have done anything to bring the wrongdoer to justice. We didn't do it. We don't know who did it. Please don't lay this blood to our account. And the answer is that the blood will be forgiven them. So if those things are true, and they go through this acknowledgement, which is kind of a repetition of what their duty is, then the blood will be forgiven them. So God's not going to bring down chastening or curses upon the nation of Israel because of this dead body. So shalt thou put away the guilt of innocent blood from among you, when thou shalt do that which is right in the sight of the Lord. Right? God gets to define what is right and righteous. And so for them, this nation of Israel, they were required to go through this to fulfill the law when you came upon this unsolved or unknown murder mystery. This is before CSI. You only had so many ways to determine who done it. And so in this scenario where you generally didn't know, this was a way that they could avoid having the innocent blood of that dead man put to their account and the whole nation suffering. But they had to go through this procedure. All right, second category that's discussed here in Deuteronomy 21 and verse 10. When thou goest forth to war against thy enemies, and the Lord thy God delivers them into thy hand, and thou hast taken them captive, and seest among the captives a beautiful woman, and hast desire unto her, that thou wouldest have her to wife. All right, so that's your scenario. One, we're talking about going forth to battle against someone other than the Canaanites. Right? They had already been given explicit instructions that they were not allowed to take captives of the Canaanites. They weren't allowed to have treaties with them. God was judging that whole people for their wickedness and their idolatry and the corrupt practices. And he did not want his new nation that he's made and brought together, is going to give this land, to follow in the patterns of their wicked practices. And so that's why they're going to be completely cut off. So we're talking about going out and you're conquering lands outside of Canaan. And this goes back to chapter 20, when they had rules of war, where when you were besieging a city, they were required to give them an opportunity to make peace. If that city voluntarily opened up its gates, then everyone would survive. They wouldn't take them captive, and they just became tributes. They had a monetary obligation to Israel. But if they did not, then what Israel was instructed to do was to besiege the city. And when the Lord had given it into their hands, all the men were going to be slain. Right? They had an opportunity to survive, But all the men would be slain, and the women and children would be taken as captives. And so that would be your scenario here. When, all right, the city's been captured, the men are all dead, and you see a woman there, and an individual Israelite desires to marry one of these captives. Now, there are some rules that he would have to follow. God is putting, guardrails and, really some protection for this captive woman, more than than any other culture would have. So he is making provision for her sake. So what do? You would have her to be thy wife. Thou shalt bring her to thine house. She shall shave her head and pare her nails. So you've got kind of this idea of a ceremonial cleansing, where she goes, the any remaining attributes of her customary practices with how they had their hair or their nails, and we're going back down to a blank slate. But you couldn't just marry her immediately. You had to give her new clothes, right? She's not still wearing the garb of captivity, which are generally not very nice. And then you had to give her a month to grieve her parents, whom she won't see anymore. So she shall put the raiment of her captivity from off her, and shall remain in thy house, and bewail her father and her mother a full month. All right. So this is a mandatory grieving period where she's got the time to kind of adapt and grow into this situation. This the Israelite could not just go see a captive and go and immediately sleep with her, make her his wife, right? The Lord was protecting her and giving this kind of transition, because she is going to become part of Israel. She would be, her children would be Israelites. So after that month, then thou shalt go into her and be your husband, and she shall be thy wife. Okay, so that's the scenario. If you've married a captive, have to go through that procedure. Really, all this is for her benefit. But in verse 14, it deals with the hardness of men's hearts, that if he decides to later divorce her, can he treat her like a captive again? And the answer is no. It shall be that if thou have no delight in her, then thou shalt let her go whither she will. She'll be a free woman. But thou shalt not sell her at all for money. Thou shalt not make merchandise of her, because thou hast humbled her. All right. So in captives taken by war, they were permitted to own them as slaves, but you couldn't sleep with your slaves. If you decided to make one your wife, then that's what she was. She was a wife, and if you divorced her, she did not fall back into this captive slave category. She became a free woman. He'd have to follow through with the procedures of divorce, giving her bill of divorcement, but he could not take her and try to resell her. So again, this is another protection to prevent men from using captive women and then moving on, or trying to it was a deterrent from that. It became a reason to have the relationship go longer if there was no ability to turn it into a financial gain after the fact. All right, next scenario in verse 15. If a man have two wives, one beloved and another hated, right, just a reminder, just because we see this Bible describing a scenario doesn't mean that scenario is good. All right, a lot of the things that we're addressing have occurred, but there's nothing in Scripture that mandates or even endorses polygamy, having more than wives. But there are scenarios where they did, and so in that scenario, the Bible, and God is anticipating that action, and providing a protection for the children of those that were not the preferred spouse. Right? Think of Rachel being preferred by Jacob, and Leah, who was not. So this would be a protection that would have benefited Leah's children. So here's the protection. All right, so they both born him children, both the beloved and the hated. And if the firstborn son be hers that was hated, all right, so his first son is not of the preferred wife, then it shall be, when he maketh his sons to inherit that which he hath, that he may not make the son of the beloved firstborn before the son of the hated, which was indeed the firstborn. So he didn't have the right to say, all right, this is my favorite wife. You, son, even though you weren't born first in time, are going to have the benefit of being a firstborn. Well, what's the benefit? Well, he shall acknowledge the son of the hated for the firstborn by giving him a double portion of all that he hath. For he is the beginning of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. So the right of the firstborn, at least here, is going to be a double portion of dad's inheritance. So if you've got two sons, then you chop the inheritance into thirds, and the firstborn would get 2/3, and the other would get the remaining third. So a double portion goes to him, even if he's not the son of the preferred wife. And so you've got this idea of God not respecting persons. This is preventing men from respecting persons. And so, that firstborn son, there was something special about that. And God, had said the firstborn were his and that they would have to be redeemed. And so this child couldn't be overlooked just because his mother was not the preferred one. So again, this is limiting men's rights to perform injustice on their own children. All right. Now, addressing another subject of dealing with children, if a man have a stubborn and rebellious son, which will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and that when they chasten him will not hearken unto them, then shall his father and his mother lay hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city and unto the gate of his place. And they shall say unto the elders of the city, This our son is stubborn and rebellious, and he will not obey our voice. Now, if you were growing up when I did, heard something like, well, be glad you don't live back in the day of Israelites, because, stubborn kid, you'd be stoned. Listen to this additional detail. Our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Right? We're not talking about a young child who's misbehaving. We're talking about a grown child, still living with mom and dad, disobeying them, not doing as they're said. He's eating and drinking their food, and just, it has gotten so bad that his parents have to come and say this, because one of the commandments is honor your father and mother, and he that's not, needs to die a death. Well, they're having to enforce that, right? That he is not honoring them, and he's just, a drunkard who's, filling his belly and is not working or doing anything. This is a shameful scenario, and this is something that has to be dealt with. And all the men of his city shall stone him with stones that he die. So thou shalt put evil away from you. His presence and acting that way towards his parents, being this, drunk, overeating, non-working, rebellious individual, that was an evil among Israel, and they had to address it, and there's a deterrent effect. And all Israel shall hear and fear. Do you think there'll be others who are going to follow in that same pattern of behavior if they know that the parents and the city are willing to follow God's law in dealing with it? So, these men, right, these inheritances, generally those didn't happen until after dad was dead. And so if you're living and working in the same land and compound for your dad until he dies, there needs to be a measure of authority over those children, even beyond, the young child stage or teenage stage. So that's what's addressed there. And then finally in verse 22, if a man hath committed a sin worthy of death, and he be put to death, and thou shalt hang him on a tree. All right, so we've got a very specific scenario. A man has been punished, he's been executed, and the manner of execution includes his body being displayed on a tree, then there's a limit. His body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but thou shalt in any wise bury him that day. For he that is hanged is accursed of God, that thy land be not defiled, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. So there is a curse associated with someone whose body is hanging up on a tree. And so the limit to the land is you can't put this up and have him hanging as this kind of symbol for everybody to see and fear days and weeks down the road. God is putting a limit. He says, nope, he's been accursed of God. If you leave him up and don't pull him down by that night that you put him up there, then your land is going to be defiled. You're disobeying me, and there'll be a consequence to you in the land. And so when sunset comes, he better be down and buried that same day. This verse is what's alluded to in Galatians chapter 3 and in verse 13. It's actually quoted. And it is talking about Jesus and his body. Verse 13, Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. Well, how was Jesus made a curse for us? For it is written, cursed is every one that hangeth on a tree. And so Jesus, who knew no sin, who became sin for us, this verse here is quoted, cursed is everyone who hanged on a tree. This is talking about when he is hung on that cross, he was cursed by God, and he took the curse of the law of our sin and the breaches of that law upon himself, and literally becoming a curse. And so all this, 1,500 something years before Jesus came on the scene, this verse is pointing to what he would do and accomplish by becoming that curse for us. He who had no sin became sin for us. And so that curse of the law was put upon him and taken off of us. Also probably part of the reason why in John 19, the Pharisees and the religious leaders were so animate about getting the body down and put away before nightfall, that they were going to have the thieves' legs broken when they came to Jesus. He was already dead, and so they didn't break his legs, which fulfilled another prophecy about not a bone of him shall be broken. But they needed the bodies down before nightfall. Now, the next day was a high Sabbath day, and so that's not a time for things to be displayed too, but it's probably hearkening from this verse about those that were hung on the tree needed to be buried that day. So that's Deuteronomy chapter 21.